Welcome to Connected Conversations. I am Elena Petrova, founder and CEO of AdAstra Inc. Tune in as we share inspiring stories, connect with local heroes, and discover solutions that uplift us.
Someone could lose custody of their child. Someone could lose their home. These are, for lack of a better phrase, these are life or death consequences for people, life-changing consequences. Language access is key to everything. It's the barrier that keeps us from things, but it's also the bridge that helps us.
Welcome to Connected Conversations. Thank you for joining us. And today we are back to Washington, D.C. So good to be home from New York. Even so, it's very cold here too.
It is freezing. I've lived in D.C. my whole entire life, and I don't think I've ever been this cold.
Well, today I have a very special local guest, Marilyn Lovo.
Thank you for having me.
From Ayuda. Ayuda is a local nonprofit organization. They take their history back to 1960s.
Yes, 1963, I believe. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, we've been in DC for many, many years. And now we have offices also in Maryland and also in Virginia.
So, and you keep growing.
We are. So when I first started at Ayuda 12 years ago, I think we were a staff of maybe 30 to 50, and now we're a staff of over 100. And we only had the DC and Virginia office, but now we have all three. So we've been growing for the last decade, and it's been great.
What is Ayuda?
Yes. So for those of you who maybe are not fluent in Spanish, Ayuda in English means help. And Ayuda, as you mentioned, is a nonprofit organization, and we serve low-income immigrants in the DC metropolitan area. We provide them with legal services, social services, and language access services, which is the field that I'm in. And yeah, if you are also a victim of crime, we also have services for crime victims, crime survivors. And we pride ourselves in having a holistic model where someone might come to our office looking for legal services, and then after we complete an intake, we might realize that they might benefit from therapy, they might benefit from other case management services, and the individual might communicate in a language that our staff isn't fluent in and can't serve them, adequately. So by coming to Ayuda, they can get everything. They can get legal advice, they can get help with whatever their social services needs are, and they can get served in their language, which is very important to us.
So you find yourself within this organization and you advocate for language access, you advocate for language being a human right, and you are a child of an immigrant yourself.
Yes.
Was there any particular turning point in your life when you realized that this is something that you want to do, this is the change that you want to make for the community, and building on that, probably there was some point in your life when you realized that communication is communication, but everybody should have access to information the same way.
Yes, and I think if you're a child of immigrants, if you're an immigrant yourself, you can probably identify yourself in my story. But even though I am not an immigrant myself, I was raised by immigrants, and I saw my parents struggle with just being regular people in society, trying to navigate living in a new country, living in a new city, trying to learn the language. Because without it, I don't think a lot of people realize that one of the first barriers that immigrants face when migrating to a different country is the language barrier. And language is so key to how not only we interact with the world, but how we form connections and how we make a life for ourselves. And so as a child, I was placed in the position of sometimes being my parents' interpreter during doctor's appointments. I remember sometimes the frustration we both felt because even though I could understand what their doctors were saying, I unfortunately didn't have the vocabulary in Spanish to be able to explain to them, like, no, like your health is fine, or no, your health is actually not fine, and these are things that you have to do. So I would feel frustrated, and I could see their frustration too, because they were struggling to make decisions for their lives, for themselves. And, you know, growing up in DC, I was already familiar with Ayuda's work. I think that if you have been in DC for a while, you're also very familiar with Ayuda through word of mouth, you know, speaking for the Latino community. But, you know, if your aunt goes to Ayuda for a service, that aunt is going to tell your cousins, your parents, your brothers, your sisters about where they got help, and the word will spread. And so before I even started working at Ayuda, I was already aware of their reputation in the community being a source of hope for people. You know, if they needed anything, they would just say, go to Ayuda. Like, I don't know exactly if they are able to help you with that specific thing, but if you go there, they will at least connect you with someone. So when I saw the job posting for the then language access coordinator position, I knew that I wanted to work there because it combined not just my areas of interest being helping immigrants and then also helping people just communicate. But these were two issues that were really close to the heart. And I knew the negative impact of not having language access. And so I wanted to make an impact, make a difference, and help people be informed of their rights, informed of the resources and services that were available to them. And Ayuda might not fix every problem that the individual has, but I think something that Ayuda does really, really well is it'll empower individuals with what they need in order to make the best decisions for their lives. So I think that's why I've been at Ayuda for as long as I have been. The work is still the same, but you learn something new each and every day. And I think the primary reason why I've stuck around so long is we are making a very real difference. And that is something that I will forever be grateful for, again, because being a child of immigrants, being a child of parents who are limited English proficient or non-English proficient, I have witnessed their struggles. And if there's anything I can do to help people better their lives and to really live fully and to thrive here, I'm for it.
I love those stories when your personal journey brings you to the fact when you look at the community and like, how can I change the community to level up with the people who might just starting their journey there. When we talk about information and access to information, probably there are some stories that you have within the community of Ayuda where there are really good examples why through language access, through equal access to information, the community can grow and prosper, and then at the end of the day, all of us can benefit from it. Because I truly believe that myself, and it doesn't matter what language I speak, I do not want to live in the community when people have not the same access to education, because I do not want to live around not educated people, right?
Yeah.
Or if people get sick, then one way or another it's going to affect me and my loved ones. So when we do provide that access to information, as a chain reaction, the whole community becomes better and starts leveling up. How do you guys see this?
Yes, so that's a very good question. We see this in many different ways. And one example that comes to mind was back in 2020 at the height of COVID, when there were the stay-at-home orders. We were receiving a lot. So our language access program offers free interpretation and translation services to over 100 nonprofits in DC and Maryland. And we were receiving a lot of requests to translate documents because we wanted to make sure that the community was well informed of what was happening. And so one requester submitted a document for us to review. It had been translated, I think, by a machine translation or by AI translation. They just wanted, a professional to review the translation to make sure that it was high quality and it was accurate. And reading through it, we realized that the translation instructed individuals to do the opposite of what we wanted them to do. I think the original text said something along the lines of, you should stay indoors. And then the translation said, you should leave your house. And something as small as, a translation mistake, I don't think people realize how big of an impact it can have, not just on the individual receiving that document translation, but on the entire community. And I use that as an example because whenever disasters happen, whenever there's a crisis, we need to make sure that everyone in our community is informed, not just the English-speaking community. I think we need to realize that one of the great things about the U.S. is how diverse it is in its people, its languages, its cultures. So and DC especially is a very diverse community. So it is important to make sure that everyone is informed, because one mistake like that can put people at real risk and at real danger.
And then instead spreading.
And then, we spread the virus even further. And the other example that I think of is whenever a person witnesses a crime, and that crime is being reported. Say that the witness is a limited English proficient individual and they want to, render their testimony. They want to give their statement. It is important to translate that statement, because that statement will be used as evidence in order to give the survivor, the victim, justice. And so by not doing that, we run the risk of doing injustice, of allowing, people that have committed violent crimes to continue to be offenders. Yeah. And so that's the other example of, why it's so important to have language access. And it doesn't just impact the LEP individual, it impacts everyone in the community.
That is a good point that you're bringing about the technology. Again, and I want to make sure that this is the stories that we are telling here. It's not one side, right?
Right.
Because there is absolutely no way that we would say, okay, just stay within your own language and do not learn English.
Yeah.
My suggestion is, you absolutely have to learn English, and you have to learn all other languages that are available to you, because the more the merrier, right?
Yeah, the more friends you have, the more
Right.
information you have. And I think people assume that LEP individuals don't want to learn English or aren't currently learning English, but they need language access in order to learn English. So it's kind of like that vicious cycle that doesn't end. And again, the key here is language access touches so many areas of our life. We can't live without language access. It's key to everything.
Absolutely. And you can be learning English, but then something happens and you get sick.
Yes.
And you are not going to be able to communicate those details in the hospital in the language that you are not fully grasping.
Yeah, I think you're making a very important point. There are levels to language acquisition. I mean, in the U.S., at least me growing up in elementary school and in high school, we would take language classes. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a fluent speaker of French or a fluent speaker of German. Like, I think I would have had to be fully immersed for a very long time. And even then, actually, being a native Spanish speaker and speaking a good portion of my time in Spanish, I lack a lot of the vocabulary that would be necessary in a medical setting, in a legal setting. I couldn't tell you how to say, I don't know, I'm having a heart. Well, that one's easy. If I were to say I'm having a heart attack, ataque de corazón. But like there are things that aren't in my Spanish vocabulary, and I think I would probably need an interpreter, even though I am fluent, even though I am a native Spanish speaker. I think I would most likely need an interpreter for some of those instances.
And you're absolutely right. And let's go back to technology. We are not against technology,
Right.
and technology can enhance
Right.
communication in so many different ways, for as long as we remember that technology is to enhance
Right.
humans, to assist humans, to propel humans to the next level. So that's why I like calling it human-centric technology.
I love that.
So for as long as we are going to be replacing humans with technology, that's when we are going to be ending up with the story that you just mentioned. So where do you see, what would be your advice? Because you work with hundreds nonprofits.
Yes.
And
yes.
we do know that nonprofit will be very aware of budgets.
Right.
And then when technology is going to be offered and say, hey, you know what, you're going to be saving like 30%, 50% of your language access budget, it's tempting.
It is. It's a difficult tension that I think a lot of nonprofits have to deal with, because nonprofits are notoriously under-resourced, understaffed, underfunded, but nonprofits also carry a very impactful and meaningful mission, and they care deeply about the work that they're doing, the people that they're serving. And so, personally, if I can offer this up, personally, I was very reluctant to use technology because outside of Ayuda, in addition to interpreting, to community interpreting, I also translate documents, and I do use machine translation to translate the documents. So it's no longer a question of will nonprofits use the technology that's available to them. The question now is, how do we use it responsibly? How do we use it in a way that doesn't sacrifice not just quality or accuracy, but doesn't sacrifice, I guess, human rights? Like we want to make sure that no matter the language that you are communicating in, you are receiving the same high quality services as any English speaker would receive. So my advice to nonprofit organizations, empathizing with them, because I work at a nonprofit, I know that money is tight and you want to serve as many people as possible. What I'll first say is that when you do use these technology tools, make sure that a human is always involved in the process, whether that's a bilingual staff person that works at your organization or a professional translator or a professional interpreter or an agency that you work with that offers those services. Have someone who is fluent and proficient in the language review the work that is being done by machine translation, by AI, by technology tools. Because ultimately, if something goes wrong because of a translation that was completed by AI or by machine, the machine and AI is not liable. You are liable. So it's ultimately your responsibility as a nonprofit service provider to make sure that, the work is accurate, that the work is meeting all of the requirements it's supposed to meet. So that would be my number one advice is involve a human in the process. And the other piece of advice I would offer is assess risk, or assess, I guess I'll give you an example. If you were to solely rely on machine or AI to translate a legal document, that would be bad. That's a no-go for us. We would say you need to have this professionally translated because of the nature and the gravity of the negative consequences that could result from any inaccuracies, right? So you don't want to fully rely, well, in general, don't fully rely on machine or AI translations. But I think consider the setting. Like if you're using Google Translate to translate a sentence just to tell someone, hey, like we know that you are not fluent in English. We will find you an interpreter. Just give us 5 minutes. Like, maybe for that small, very small initial conversation, just to communicate to the person, we see you, we know your needs, we're going to fill your needs. Like, maybe those are more appropriate settings. But that's the other piece of advice. Just consider the setting, because for some things, I don't think machine and AI translation are appropriate. For other things, they might be a little bit more appropriate. But just in general, we shouldn't, in my opinion, I don't think we should be fully relying. We should always involve a human.
Say legal, because you guys do a lot of work in legal field.
Yes.
What would be, maybe you have already stories in real life, but if you don't have real life, give us the worst case scenario. What could be horribly wrong that could go in this case?
Well, someone could be denied legal status because of a translation mistake, or someone's abuser. So Ayuda also works with victims of crime. Someone's abuser could not receive, could not be held responsible and accountable for their actions. And another important thing to note is that trauma-informed peace, I don't think AI or machine translation are at the point where they could provide trauma-informed services. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. Like, a lot of the people that we help, their lives and their cases are so nuanced. You do need to tailor your approach and make sure that your approach is client-centered, because every person has different needs. But when I think of negative consequences, yes, like someone could lose custody of their child. Someone could lose their home. Like, these are, for lack of a better phrase, like, these are life or death consequences for people, life-changing consequences. So again, that's why we have to be responsible, and we can use the tools available to us to enhance the level of services we're offering, but we must use them responsibly, and we must never use them in replace of humans, of the services that we're offering.
I was listening to you and I was thinking, when we use humans, right, in any profession, we verify their qualifications.
Yes.
We're not just going to go to the barista at the coffee shop and we ask that barista to represent us in court. Because, right? We know this is our two different professions, and each profession would require a level of education, background, experience. The same with the technology. We know that different engines in different languages are good in certain fields.
Yes.
And so this is the reason why it's so important for the professionals to identify, right? So we know that for English and Spanish, we have more data, and therefore the engine is going to be, well, let's say, smarter.
Yeah.
But then we have languages of lesser diffusions.
I try not to think of that because even with Spanish, Spanish is such a gendered language. And then also with Spanish, we have like the formal way of speaking and the informal way of speaking. And even though some of these tools have a lot of information available to them, they still inaccurately translate things. Maybe the meaning is there, but the audience has changed. Like, maybe the text we're entering is supposed to be more formal. It renders a more informal translation, and vice versa. Or, again, like, Spanish is so gendered, like it does get that incorrect a lot of the times. Mm-hmm. For the most part, like, the main message is there, but like I mentioned, because I translate outside of Ayuda, I'm having to spend a significant amount of time editing translations, and that's Spanish, one of the most spoken languages, I think, well, especially in DC, I think Spanish after English is the most spoken language in the area. So yeah, you bring up a good point. Like, with languages of lesser diffusion, there's less data. And also, a lot of these tools are pulling data from European texts, some tools are starting to pull their data from human translations, which is great because, again, because the translations were done by humans, I think, do a better job of picking up on those nuances and making sure that the translations are not just accurate, but also culturally appropriate.
So basically, what you are saying is use professionals,
Yes.
use specialists, and then if you are going to be using technology, clarify everything. Make sure, in the way that I look at it, make sure that you choose the engine that specializes in the field,
Right.
and the language.
Yes. So at Ayuda, our program does train nonprofits about language access, their legal obligations, best practices. And we always tell people that you should always work with a professional. We understand that services can be expensive, but actually, sometimes the mistakes that arise from using or solely relying on machine translations, AI, or other individuals who are not professionals, like sometimes that ends up being even more expensive than the actual services themselves. And you should think of it as an investment in the community. Like, you are making sure that everyone is well informed, everyone is safe, everyone can navigate the legal system, everyone understands their rights and understands, what public benefits they can benefit from. This is good for the community. And if you were to spend your money on anything, like, why not spend your money on this rather than, because sometimes I feel we have a scarcity mindset. Like, instead of saying we don't have money for professional interpretation and translation, well, if mistakes happen, that's going to be pretty expensive, not just in terms of money, but also potential lawsuits, potential lives, because there are real consequences from subpar services. So, like you said, like, we are definitely on agreement when it comes to use a professional, assess the tools you're using, make sure that they're appropriate, and be responsible when you're using them.
And your organization deals a lot with trauma-informed communication.
Yes.
So what is trauma-informed communication?
So the best way that I can explain it is an individual who has gone through trauma, any sort of trauma, has had power taken away from them. Because whenever it comes to crime, I think you can narrow it down to just, someone wanting power over someone else, right? And so when someone experiences crime, the offender is essentially robbing them of their power, their autonomy, their voice, their rights, their dignity. So trauma-informed services returns that to the individual. So it's a question of how can we help this individual, but make sure that whatever we do to help them is what they actually want for themselves. And looking at it practically in an interpretation setting, right? And I guess I'll use the deaf and hard of hearing example, because there are individuals who are deaf and blind. And so for those individuals, you need a team of interpreters, specifically certified deaf interpreters who are deaf individuals themselves, who have a full understanding of deafness and deaf culture. And preferably you want certified deaf interpreters who know how to do what's called tactile interpretation or pro-tactile interpretation, which might involve some touching of the deaf consumer, the deaf individual. But if this deaf individual is a victim of a violent crime, say a sexual assault or physical assault, they might not want someone to touch them.
Can you explain a little bit for
Yes.
our listeners who do not know
what tactile
is?
interpretation, Well, pro-tactile, because think of tactile as the deaf. So the way that American sign language interpretation works in general is the verbal, in this example, the verbal English speaker will speak. The hearing sign language interpreter will interpret between the English speaker and then the deaf interpreter. And then the deaf interpreter who knows how to do tactile or protactile interpretation might hold the deaf individual's hands and do the signs on their hands. Or if the deaf interpreter knows how to do protactile, might actually do certain signs on their body to indicate things that are happening in their environment. Like say someone walks in behind me and like drops their stuff, like the deaf interpreter who knows how to do protactile interpretation might sign something on the person's body saying, hey, someone just walked behind you and dropped their stuff. Like it basically gives them the full experience that we hearing individuals have, an awareness of not just what's being communicated in the room, but what's happening in the room. But going back to trauma-informed services, a deaf individual who is blind and has experienced trauma might not want to be touched. And so there is a very nuanced way that you can approach those kinds of scenarios. And so the interpreters might assign and say, you know, what is your preferred mode of communication? Usually we handle it this way, but if you prefer a different way, we can do that. Or usually we arrange the room in this certain way, but if you want us to sit next to you or behind you or in front of you, like we can do that. So again, it's just giving the survivor all the power in the way that they are receiving their communication, and also power in information, like giving them the information that they need to make decisions for their lives. And also, you know, we've all experienced trauma, and trauma comes up in different ways. And someone who is trauma informed will know what to do when, say, the individual breaks down during a session, right? Because someone who's not trauma informed might just say, it's okay, here's some tissues, let's push forward. But someone who's trauma informed might say, let's actually take a pause here, like, and if you need some space, we'll give you some space. We can continue with our session today. We can reschedule it. Like, what do you prefer? Like, what would be the best for you in this scenario? So yeah, I think these technology tools haven't yet gotten to the point where they can say, oh, this person is a trauma survivor. We need to approach this differently. It's very clinical, almost very like, you know, soul. I mean, it's a machine. It doesn't really have, you know, like feelings. But yeah, that's why, again, we always say get a professional, because there are a lot of excellent interpreters who are trauma informed and who are very knowledgeable in not just legal settings, but also in victim services settings. And you can get the best services from that individual.
Yeah, I was listening to you, just like definitely feeling this environment must be a lot of vicarious trauma for you guys who are working with this on every day. How do you handle vicarious trauma?
To be honest, we probably don't handle it as well as we should. But at Ayuda, we do have wellness days, which are very much needed. We have, I think, 10 of them throughout the year. So it's just a day where we're not working, and we can use that time for whatever we need, whether that's, you know, resting, whether it's spending time with friends and loved ones. But really, it's checking in with one another every day and just saying, like, you know, we know that this news that came out today, like, might be affecting you mentally, emotionally. What can we do to support you? Do we need to pause and process and then figure out what our action steps are? I think what's great about DC, especially recently, is I've seen a lot of collaboration between organizations that serve the same people, but in different capacities, and those organizations coming together to put on different events, put on different presentations, or have a presence in the community and just inform the community of what's happening and of the services and their rights. It's been nice to see that, because it reminds you that you're not doing this work alone, that there are other people with the same mission, the same vision, the same passion, and the weight feels a little lighter when there's more people doing it. So I think that's another way that we are also taking care of ourselves is, we're reminding ourselves we have community, we have partners. Let's lean on each other, because this is not, what is it? This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. Yeah. So we have to make sure that we ourselves are well, because we can't serve people while being unwell. And also, Ayuda has the benefit of having a social services team. We have therapists in our offices, and sometimes we might pop into their office and say, hey, like, I know you're not my therapist, but can we just like talk for a bit? And that's always great, because again, we encourage each other and share things that help each other. Like, I am a person of faith, and so whenever I go through a crisis, or whenever I'm stressed, or whenever I'm reaching burnout, I lean on my faith. I lean on my faith community. And so, if someone has that in common with me, I might suggest like, hey, like this worked for me, or they might have a book that worked for them. But it really is just about community, making sure that we're staying connected and not isolating ourselves.
That's such a great point that you brought, because that would be my next question, and you're already covering it. So how do different people go through trauma differently, and stress and burnout? No, I think that it's inevitable in today's life.
Yeah.
No matter how you want to protect yourself, one way or another, you're going to face it. So what is the best way you already mentioned community,
right.
faith, connection.
Yeah.
That's three things, or anything else in your opinion that would help people to stay just sort of like stay energized, stay full. I'm going to say stay full.
Yes, I think boundaries, like I recently had to spend less time on social media, and the people in my life know I work for an organization that serves immigrants, and right now immigration is such a hot topic, and I've had to ask friends and family, like, hey, like I see this every day, I'm in this 24/7, like, it's not that I don't want to hear this, I'm just telling you I'm already hearing it, and like for my own well-being, I need one space where things are light and not heavy, even if it's just for 1 hour, 2 hours, like just that. Like, I think establishing boundaries is helpful, because again, we ourselves also carry trauma, and sometimes things that are happening in the world re-traumatize us, and so I think having boundaries help. I think if you're not seeing a therapist, like, that helps as well. There doesn't necessarily have to be something going wrong in your life, but as someone who has been to therapy gave me a lot of useful and helpful skills that I use to this day, boundaries being one of them, like, and communicating those boundaries to the people I love, and being transparent and vulnerable. That's helped. And I think, again, like, never take rest for granted, even if it's just a day to regroup. That is helpful. At Ayuda, I had a 2-month sabbatical, which was very nice. Very nice. I didn't go anywhere. I just stayed in the area. But when I came back, I was re-energized. I had so many ideas of how I wanted to see the program grow. And again, rest is so important. If you can find even an hour or two, or a day, or a week, or a month, or 2 months, we need to take care of ourselves wholly. So not just our mental health, but also our emotional health, our physical health.
Right.
because trauma does impact our physical health. It impacts everything. Like trauma impacts everything. So just taking care of the full person so that you can show up to work as a full person. And that's really the only way that you're going to be able to help someone, is if you are showing up fully, and we need to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for this. I truly, it took me a while to learn what is fulfillment and what is feeling you.
Right.
Because fulfillment is my podcast. I love this. That brings fulfillment to me. But it's the energy that goes out. You need to find the energy that brings you in. And that might be something different.
Yeah.
That might be doing nothing on the sofa and reading a book, or like...
Yeah. I mean, I have the blessing of working somewhere where I feel fulfilled, like helping the immigrant community, helping the limited English proficient community, helping the deaf and hard of hearing community. That fulfills me. But when I'm just running at full speed, eventually, like I tire, I burn out, and I'm not as effective or as creative or as strategic as I need to be. So it's almost like that forces me to be well, because that fulfills me and I want to continue doing that. And the only way I will be able to do that is, by also taking care of myself.
Right. So we all need to remember, feeling yourself,
Yes,
will allow you to fulfill
right,
your life. So that's a good point. Now let's take a look at the community, because community is our connection,
right.
and it can fulfill, and it can also fill your life. And this is something that you're working on. How do you see the community today?
The community is inspiring. You know, I'm the kind of person that always tries to find the silver lining in things, and I think for me recently it's been seeing, like, you always have an idea of who your supporters are, and then when things happen and you see more people than you expected showing up and lending a hand, that is so inspiring. And they are supporters and people from all parts of the US, all parts of the world. They come from different cultural backgrounds. They speak in different languages. They are from different age groups, and you really see them rallying behind a cause and saying, you know, I'm good at doing this thing. Like, how can I help you in that area? Or I'm good at communication. Like, is there anything I can do to help Ayuda with your communication? Or I just put me to work. Like, even if it's just bagging groceries or helping with intake, like I just want to help. Like, just put me to work. That's been very inspiring and encouraging, and again just reminds us that we are not alone, that that people care, that people care, they care deeply, and they're willing to go above and beyond to make sure that everyone feels safe and welcome, and everyone feels like they have their dignity, that they belong.
That is incredible. I love hearing this positive. Like, we need to have that positive reinforcement that there is good in the community, and you mentioned people want to feel that they belong.
Right.
That is our human nature. We want to belong to something bigger than us.
Yes.
So how can we build this community? How can we make this conversation that is inclusive?
Yes. So, you know, Ayuda, because the word Ayuda means help in Spanish, people might not know what we, the Spanish-speaking community, all of them might not know what we do, but Ayuda means help. So if I need help, I will go to Ayuda, right? But actually, that I mentioned that example because sometimes even just translating signage helps people feel more welcome. What I would hear growing up is, I didn't go to that organization for help because no one speaks Spanish there, and so they must not be able to help me. They must not have services for me. But then I would go with them and I would serve as an interpreter, not a qualified one. but then we'd realize, like, no, they can actually help you. They just don't have an interpreter, right? So sometimes even just translating signage, even just translating instructions that say we have interpretation available, that helps people know that the door isn't closed for them, that they can go to your organization. Even if you don't have a Spanish-speaking staff or Amharic-speaking staff, like you will find someone that can be that bridge for the two of you so that you can communicate and find out more about how you can work together. And there are certain places in DC, like Chinatown, for example, has a lot of signage that's both in English and in Mandarin. You might see some places in, say, Columbia Heights or Adams Morgan that does have some signage in Spanish as well as English. Like, even just translating signage helps people feel more welcome, and even just demonstrating willingness to provide interpretation and translation services. That those two things go a very long way.
Interesting. So it all starts with the front.
With the front,
Yeah,
the very front.
Yeah. Anything else that you would recommend, particularly nonprofits, right? We have a lot of nonprofits here in DC, and you guys have been working with over 100.
Yeah.
So how do you make yourself inclusive? How do you make yourself welcoming? How do you make your materials
right
accessive
right
to as many as possible?
Yes. So first, it's becoming knowledgeable and aware of your language access obligations. So in DC, we have the DC Language Access Act, which instructs DC government agencies, contractors, grantees to provide interpretation and translation services in the DC's vital languages, and to provide those services for free. So, familiarize yourself with language access laws and obligations, because language access is a right, and by not offering language access, we are violating people's rights. Right. So that would be the first step. Just familiarize yourself with legislation.
And where can we find this information?
So you can find it online. Just, Google DC Language Access Act. There's actually an amendment to the act that was recently introduced. And the amendment essentially will add an enforcement structure, a fine structure, so that if an agency is found out of compliance, like they will be fined, and the individuals who did not receive language access will receive those funds. But yeah, you can look up language access legislation online. There's actually a lot of developments happening, which is really exciting, because I've always said language access feels like a new field, because it's at least in my opinion, it's new and developing, because whenever we talk about offering legal services or victim services, we think, oh, we need to hire more lawyers, we need to hire more case managers, more therapists. We never think, oh, we need money to translate documents and to hire interpreters to interpret for clients who are not fluent in spoken English. So that's why I mentioned familiarizing yourself with legislation, and then also having a plan in place. It's not a question of will an LEP individual or deaf individual show up at my door. It's a question of when. And so when they do, you don't want to be that organization that turns them away. It's not because you mean to, but because a lot of organizations that don't offer language services, I think it's because they just don't know or don't know how. And so having a plan in place will help solve a lot of those challenges. And the plan could be as simple as we will create an account with an on-demand telephonic and video remote interpretation service provider. And that way, if an individual comes in, we pick up the phone, we dial the agency connects us with an interpreter, and then through the interpreter, we communicate with the individual that came to the door. So have a plan in place, and then have a contract agreement with an agency, right? In DC and Maryland, if you are a nonprofit that serves a DC or Maryland resident that has a legal or victim services matter, you can come to Ayuda. Our language access program, will take you through an application process and a screening process to determine whether you're eligible. And as long as there's funding, we can help you. Even when there isn't funding, we can still help you. Like there might be, some other solutions we're able to offer you. But the main takeaway here is establish a contract relationship with an agency so that when the need arises, you are good to go, right? You don't have to begin those conversations then and then delay the person receiving services because you're trying to figure all of that out, because that would be not just unfair to the person, but you could potentially be hurting the person. Their case might be urgent, and so they urgently need to see someone, and sometimes it does take some time to find an interpreter or a translator. So have that already in place. And then like I mentioned before, making sure that the individuals are aware that you're offering services in language, and also training your staff, because your staff might not be aware that you have a language access plan, that you have an agreement with an agency. They might know those things, but might not know how to access the services. So make sure that everyone on your staff is trained and knows how to use these services and practices using these services. And again, just translate signage, translate intake forms, translate any flyers for events, include messages in your flyers that say, if you need interpretation services, email us so that we can have that ready for you by the time this event occurs. And then the other, which I realize not every organization is in a position to do so, but if you can hire staff who are bilingual or multilingual and are proficient. So I want to make a distinction real quick, because I think a lot of people assume that because you're fluent in a language, because you're a native speaker, you're proficient in that language. Yeah. And I'll use myself as an example. So I interpret in community settings. If you were to send me to a law firm to interpret for, I don't know, a housing law case or an immigration law case, I would be of no help to you, because that is not my level of proficiency or my level of expertise or my level of knowledge when it comes to Spanish, communicating in Spanish. So yeah, like if you have a high volume of individuals communicating in a specific language coming to your organization, it might be worth hiring bilingual staff, but again, making sure that they are fluent and that they are proficient. So having them demonstrate that through passing a language proficiency test.
Basically, get the umbrella before it starts raining, right?
Get ready before they come.
Yeah, because once you have this relationship in place, you don't pay for this, right? It's not like you're obligated to pay, and then when who knows if somebody shows up at your door. No, you have this in place. You don't pay for it, but you have system in place.
Yeah, I will say if you have an agreement with our program, with the language access program, you don't pay for services. If you don't have an agreement with our program, unfortunately, you will have to pay for services. But again, there are a lot of different agencies in the area that offer competitive rates, Astra being one of them. We work a lot with you all. But yeah, you can shop around, find something that works for your budget, and also find something that meets your needs, because not all agencies are the same. Also, like, some agencies might specialize in conference interpreting. Some agencies might specialize in medical interpreting. If you're a legal services provider, you really do need to look for an agency that has legally trained interpreters. Or if you're a victim services organization, you need to find an agency that has trauma informed interpreters. And so you can ask agencies about the training and experience of the interpreters or translators that they work with, and just make sure that they are aligned with your needs.
Yeah. It's sometimes businesses, it's like, you want to set yourself up for success, credit line, office stuff before things start happening, right? So just be ahead.
Be prepared, just like
Anything,
we're prepared for, well, I don't think we were prepared for the DC snowstorm, but just be prepared, because worst case scenario, someone comes in and you have nothing. Best case scenario, someone comes in and you have everything. Or best case scenario, or the scenario in which, like, you don't end up needing to use the interpretation and translation services. It's better to not, what is it that I'm trying to say? It would be bad to need those services and not have them available, versus, someone comes in and you are able to help them because you were prepared.
And that's a good conversation to also have, to, like, what are the incentives, right? Of course, it's good for the community. It's good for the community members who need that service. But if you are a nonprofit, and you probably have more knowledge to talk about it, or if you are a regular service for profit, the more awareness that you have about your brand in different communities, the better it is for the growth, right, of your brand in the end of the day. Because what is the current, you probably have this information more than I have, what is the current population, non-English population of US? We have, 360 million.
I am less familiar about the national statistics than I am about the local ones, but here in DC and Maryland, in DC, I think there's around 5% of DC residents are LEP, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's probably a similar percentage in Maryland, maybe more, because Maryland is bigger than DC. But we have a significant LEP population. I'm not so sure about the deaf and hard of hearing population, because the data isn't up to date as it is with LEP individuals, but DC specifically has a significant deaf and hard of hearing community. And so as a nonprofit organization, you want to be accessible to everyone. And by making yourself accessible, you are establishing a reputation of being an organization that, well, number one, just cares, right? We care about you. And we want you to come to our organization. And so we want you to be able to have access to us in the most low barrier way. And again, language is such a big barrier. The amount of people that don't get help because of a language barrier, it's scary and it's sad, right? Like, again, I mentioned the example of just hearing from members of my community saying, I didn't go to that organization because they don't help me. And then when I would ask, like, did they tell you they don't help you? They're like, no, nothing is in Spanish. And, like, no one there speaks Spanish. So I just assume they don't help me. And then I'm like, well, actually, they can help you. And so.
But then one person goes.
Yeah, and tells the rest of the community they can't help you because they don't speak Spanish. They don't have translated materials. And that's bad.
But then one person goes, and then that person might bring the whole community.
Right, yeah.
After one experience. And we have, New York has 380 80 different languages spoken just in New
Yes.
York City. So I encourage, again, whether you are for profit, whether you are non-profit, spread the word about your brand. There is no such a thing as too many sales, too many sales deals. No, there is no such a thing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Again, non-profit or for-profit, spread the word about your brand. The best thing to do it, go to different communities and introduce yourself. And
Yeah.
again, that goes through communication and language access.
Yeah, and you have greater reach too.
Right.
Greater reach and greater impact.
Yes, and as I was listening to you, I think the best way to keep this data without specific numbers, and you can go and check this, every 10th American is either deaf or hard of hearing, so every 10th. And I think it's either every 6 or 7 American has limited English proficiency, because you could be speaking English, but again, your English might not be at the level where you're going to be able to understand in life of death or end of life or any medical situation that you still want to have assistance
You do?
with language access.
Yeah. I think if I could take anything away from this conversation, it would be language access is key to everything. It's the barrier that keeps us from things, but it's also the bridge that helps us. And so when you are considering, serving people through legal services or victim services or through medical services, just know that not every person that you serve will communicate in the same language that you are communicating in. And so you are responsible for helping everyone, regardless of language, regardless of background. And so how do we do that? And language access, right? Making sure that we can communicate with them in language, that we can make them aware of their rights and make sure that they can exercise their rights and just be fully functioning members of society. And I'm of the opinion that you can't do that without language access, because language access is communication. We need to communicate in all areas of our life, and language access is how we ensure effective communication and effective service delivery too.
Well, thank you for the story, Marilyn. And whatever your success is, your success might start or elevate at communication. And communication starts in the language that you choose to speak. Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you so much.
That was an incredible conversation, so motivational.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here, and I'm so motivated to continue doing this work. Thank you so much.
So let's make DC better.
Yes.
Together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining Connected Conversations. Help us to continue growing our community, our AdAstra community. Any support counts. My team will be incredibly grateful if you give us a like, share, a comment. I'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in into Connected Conversation. We are incredibly inspired by the potential of positive change within our communities. We invite you to be a part of our conversation, and we invite you to be a part of our journey. Please subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on our latest episodes. Your support is incredibly invaluable. It will help us to grow our community. We also encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments of each episode. Your feedback will help us to create even more meaningful conversations. We can inspire the change and connect with each other one conversation at a time.